basically, pre-contemplation is when we're not even really thinking about change or really open to change. So, for someone who is a smoker, for example, they may be just fine that they're smoking. They're not even really considering quitting. But contemplation is when suddenly maybe something's happened that's made us start to think about change. And so we are contemplating it. And so sometimes something will happen that pushes us along, maybe a health issue or something we read or something we hear on a news program or documentary that pushes us into preparation where now we're ready to commit to a change.
You have more power over your health than what you've been told. This is the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast, and I'm your host, Maya Acosta. I'm passionate about finding healthy lifestyle solutions to support optimal human health. If you're willing to go with me, together we can discover how simple lifestyle choices can help improve our quality of life and increase longevity in a big way. Let's get started. Dr. Angela Crawford joins us to talk about the psychology of creating change. We discover that finding a strong why will foster long term and sustainable change. We will also learn how we can support our loved ones to adopt a plant based lifestyle. As always, the full bio and the links for each guest are found in the show notes. And I hope that you enjoy this episode.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
I've always thought about how important it is to have a psychologist's perspective on all of this in terms of making a change. And so I'm happy that you're going to be here to talk about why people who are interested in becoming plant based sometimes face obstacles. And then we'll learn about what we can do to help inspire that change. Um, First of all, I'd love for you to kind of just kind of reiterate to our listeners what We Did It Health is, because I have mentioned it on the podcast before, but since you are very involved with the organization, I was hoping you can kind of go over it a little bit.
Sure, that sounds great. We Did It Health is an online scoreboard where people who have transitioned or are transitioning to a plant-based diet can share the health benefits and emotional benefits and other benefits they've received from this lifestyle. And it just, when you go to the We Did It Health website, there's a one question survey that's very brief and easy to complete where you can share any benefits you've had. And there's also a place where if you want to share in more detail a testimonial about, health changes you've had, you can. And the hope is that over time, this scoreboard can inspire other people to see like, oh, I have diabetes and look, there's all these people that are, getting benefits from a plant-based diet. And it might inspire people to know real life examples of health changes. Over time, the platform will also have added content that people can draw on to learn more about the plant-based diet. It's in the process of evolution. But right now they're sharing resources through their e-newsletter. Once you complete the survey, you receive an e-newsletter with resources, supporting healthy living and plant-based eating. And that also includes the ebook that we'll talk some about today as a free gift.
Thank you for sharing that. And yes, as a matter of fact, I chimed in, as Peter Goldstein likes to say, I chimed in and put in my 2 cents in terms of what eating this way has done for my life. And so you also have your own story of how you adopted a plant-based diet. Would you like to share that with us?
Each of us have our own journey, as to how we move towards this way of eating. And I want to like just share a little background. Before I moved to plant-based eating, I was not a healthy eater for the most part. I ate a lot of comfort foods, a lot of microwave foods, a lot of candy, sweets, processed foods. I didn't like to cook. So although I exercised a fair amount, I didn't eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. And, I started eating more fruits and vegetables just gradually. But then what happened for me was actually learning a little bit about how animal agriculture worked that actually opened my eyes to want to eat more plants. I saw a special on TV about people that worked in a meat processing plant, and many of them were immigrants. Many of them didn't feel like they had a lot of power in their work environment and had injuries, and then still had to work even with the injuries because they were so financially vulnerable that they couldn't, speak up, and the work environment didn't support them. And so when I learned about that, it just made me think more about how my food got to me and what was the process. And, I guess the part of me that was compassionate, at that time, I was working actually in a pain management program, working with injured workers. So I think that made me really think about, what they were going through in a way that maybe other people might not have connected with. And then I started to think about just all aspects of it, what the treatment of animals was, what was actually going into my body. So I started reading everything I could. At that time, that was 15 years ago, I went to the library and like read every book in the library. And so I really learned about the health benefits too. I learned about Dr. Dean Ornish's work with reversing heart disease and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. I have a strong family history of heart disease in my family. And, I started cooking. The very next day after I saw that special, I went to Barnes and Noble. I bought my first plant-based vegetarian cookbook, made a vegetarian lasagna that night. I had to buy all these new pots and pans because I never cooked. And it was really a great experience. And I found that I loved to cook once I switched to plant-based. Like so many doors opened for me. I tried new spices. I tried, new ingredients that I'd never thought of before. And I just would start doing like a new recipe or two every week. And over time, I gave up all meat entirely. A few years later, I started to give up dairy and eggs too. And I found like releasing the dairy from my life. Actually, my seasonal allergies that I thought I always would have went away. Some skin conditions that I sometimes struggled with went away. So, and here I am, 15 years later in my mid 50s with really good health and a lot of energy. And I feel good about the way I'm eating, that it's kinder to both animals, the planet, and my own health. So it like feels good on all levels.
Best decision ever, right?
Yes. And I would never go back, like my food choices are so much more varied and interesting and nourishing and fulfilling than they ever had been.
As a psychologist, you are now really working on understanding why people make the change in the first place and what issues become barriers or obstacles towards creating that change. And like I said, that's what we'll talk about specifically. Before we do that, can we sort of explain to our listeners, for people that may be new to this idea, what is the difference between veganism and plant based lifestyle?
Sure. So veganism at its core is been defined as sort of an ethical position that people have where they want to avoid harm or exploitation to animals. And so many people that identify as vegan avoid buying anything that has animal products, both food and also sometimes other items as well. However, a vegan diet, while it avoids animal products, it can vary, depending on the person as to whether it's a healthier vegan diet or not. There can be a lot of variability there because nowadays there are so many options for vegans of plant-based options, some of which are processed and not as healthy. I mean, I will say that from what I've read and understand, giving up meat and dairy, which is inflammatory, can be beneficial regardless, but there still are variations in how healthy a vegan lifestyle is as far as the diet part. Now, a plant-based diet is one that, especially a whole food plant-based diet, focuses on plant foods and ideally as minimally processed as possible. And that sort of way of eating has been associated with also a lot of health benefits, getting a lot of antioxidants and fiber and lessening our sugar intake and processed food intake, as well as the meat and dairy, is associated with greater health. So there's an overlap in a sense that they both avoid animal products, but there are variations in terms of how healthy it is. The more whole plant foods and the less processed, the healthier usually it is.
Thank you for explaining that. Speaking specifically about the plant based diet, I was surprised to learn that there are even variations within that term, within that description. Like you said, people can be on a plant based diet and 100% eliminate all animal products. And some people can be 90% plant based and still have a little bit of fish and other, things like that in their diet. So, for us, for the sake of like what I typically talk about, I'm always emphasizing complete plant based lifestyle or diet, meaning not any amount of dairy or eggs in the diet for optimal health. However, we know that people cannot necessarily go 100% all the time. And we'll talk about the issues, the reasons why that happens. Um, do we know what percentage of people in terms of age groups and ethnic backgrounds tend to lean more towards making a decision for the environment as opposed to making a decision for their health or for the animals? I would love to know that number someday.
There's a growing younger generation that are interested in plant-based and vegan eating, but their motivations are more often the environment and ethics, because when we're younger, many of us haven't yet faced the health issues. And then a lot of us that are, kind of getting older, health might often be a more driving force, but that's not always the case. And it would be interesting to know those statistics, of who chooses for what reasons.
So we kind of lightly talked on why people decide to go plant based. Can we just kind of explain a little bit more what we mean by the environment? A lot of times when I talk about it, or I've had like Glenn Mercer on the show as well, and we talk about the environment, but if we don't talk specifically about what we mean by that, I don't know that people understand how we're impacting our planet.
So there are a lot of reasons that people do consider going plant-based. And obviously one is health, which is, certainly what we're going to be touching on more today in our conversation. All the ways that eating more plants helps both reverse or prevent certain diseases that are common in Western countries, like heart disease, diabetes, certain forms of cancer, certain autoimmune diseases, and also just helps to have better fitness and overall health and energy, our body to thrive. So as people learn about those benefits, and there's certainly more and more people choosing to eat more plant-based or fully plant-based for health reasons. But on top of that, the ethical reasons, sort of as I was touching on with my experience with learning about the workers and then realizing, like, gosh, if I'm not really liking how the workers are treated, what do I think about the whole thing with animals? And how so many of us love our dogs and cats, but, we maybe don't get a second thought to other kinds of animals and the sort of experience that they might go through. So for some people, they kind of awaken to realizing, I care about cows and pigs and chickens too. And, so they become plant-based or vegan for ethical reasons, to as an expression of compassion for all beings. And then for some people, there's the environment. We learn that animal agriculture, especially the way it's expanded into factory farming in the last, I don't know how many years, it has an increasingly toxic effect on our environment. Just for everything from, use of land to use of water to greenhouse gases, and, cutting down rainforests to create more feed or grazing space for the animals that are, grown for food. All of that just has a huge impact. And one book that I, found really helpful for me, called Eat for the Planet, they find from their statistics that if you eat a fully plant-based or vegan diet, you save 1,500 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, and 30 square feet of forest in a day for just eating that plant-based diet. So just, simply by what you're eating plants lower on the food chain, you save all of that, plus cut, your carbon emissions possibly in half. That seems kind of distant, so that's not always easy sometimes for us to take in, but it becomes an added reason, to make a healthy change for yourself.
Yes, and as we're experiencing more of the effects or the consequences of climate change, I think more of us are waking up to the reality that something's going on and we're probably contributing to it. So, Angela, I love your guide. I'm so glad that you put this together and that we'll talk about how we can inspire change. So, what are some of the common concerns that people have in general when it comes to making a change?
First of all, when you're thinking of healthy lifestyle change in general, whether it's our own change process or someone we love that we want to encourage, there are just first of all general stages of change that we all may go through. So just starting with that in general, just any healthy lifestyle change, whether it's eating healthier, eating more plants, exercising, quitting smoking, any of those things. There's a model called the Stages of Change model by Dr. Prochaska and Di Clemente. And basically, they found that people tend to go through stages of change before they engage or fully succeed in a lifestyle change. And so those stages are pre-contemplation, contemplation, and I'll explain what each of them are in a moment, preparation, or sometimes it's called determination, and then action and maintenance. And so basically, pre-contemplation is when we're not even really thinking about change or really open to change. So, for someone who is a smoker, for example, they may be just fine that they're smoking. They're not even really considering quitting. Um, but contemplation is when suddenly maybe something's happened that's made us start to think about change. And so we are contemplating it. We are probably ambivalent, going back and forth between the pros and cons at this stage, and like, yes, maybe I want to, and then, but this is so much more comfortable just to continue the way I am. And so we can be in that for a long time. And sometimes people get stuck in kind of a chronic contemplation where they're going back and forth and waiting for some certainty, which doesn't happen. Sometimes we just have to take the next step, and so sometimes something will happen that pushes us along, maybe a health issue or something we read or something we hear on a news program or documentary, that pushes us into preparation where now we're ready to commit to a change. We start to prepare our environment and our life for it. So if it's going more plant-based, it would be, maybe reading like I did when I went out and bought that cookbook, and I started to buy the pots and pans and, um, tried my first recipe. And then action is where, we are taking that actual action. And I think it's really important to then add in maintenance, because I think a lot of us think once we take an action, oh, we're there, we got it. But really, like, change happens as a process, and we need to set up our environment, our support system, buy the things we need, prepare and plan on an ongoing basis, learn how to cope with setbacks and, things that would get in the way, how to handle, like, for example, when I became vegan, like learning how I'd handle social situations. How would I handle a dinner at a friend's house or, a social gathering where it might not be plant-based foods? So having a plan for that. So maintenance ends up being really important. And then adding in that relapse is often considered actually a part of the change process, because most people do kind of have setbacks multiple times before they're successful in maintaining a change. So, just realizing, okay, if I have a setback, it's an opportunity to learn it. I don't have to interpret it as a failure. I can, see what went wrong here and how do I keep moving forward towards my goal. So just knowing that can help both our own change process as well as helping a loved one, because if they're in pre-contemplation and we're trying to push them to make a change they're not ready to make, it's rarely going to be successful. Probably we're better off figuring out how can we be open to, like, opportunities to invite them into readiness to start to contemplate even that this could be of help to them, and then they, moving gradually through the stages.
So, what would you say to us, the people who have already presented the documentary, presented the recipes, held that person's hand, and the change has never happened?
Yes, well, first of all, I can relate. So, and I think there's a couple of levels here. One is just how hard change itself can be for people. That can be any change. So first, just honoring change is not always easy. As a psychologist working in this field for many years, I know there's some clients that have really made a lot of change from my work with them, and we're not necessarily working on changing diet, but many things. And just the change process in general often is slower than we'd like, for some. people. And so realizing they may be in that pre-contemplation, contemplation place, and we can't make someone move where they're not ready to move, you know. So that's one thing I guess I'd keep in mind is it is their own journey, and we can provide support and encouragement, but and resources, but it is based on their readiness and interest and openness. And and then I would also say that this particular change of encouraging people to eat more plants and or a plant exclusive whole food plant-based diet, because it's not yet embraced by generalized society, and and even many medical professionals have not fully read the research or really embrace this way of eating. People get mixed messages from the media, from their doctors, from society. So just realizing, there's a lot of information out there that confuses people. And so it's hard for them sometimes to hear our message that, like, eating a plant-based diet is so transformative. And there's so much research backing it. And then we'll add in like our own personal sort of addictions and things that are comforts to us. We grow up with these foods, and often they're part of our upbringing. And also there are many of these comfort foods have been designed to sort of addict us by having lots of salt, sugar, and fat. So we were never meant, to eat that much of it, but now it's so readily available, it can really make us addicted psychologically and physically to eating that way. So there's all these different factors that play into why it can be hard for people.
So now you have given us some steps on how we can inspire change. Let's talk about those.
Okay, great. So in the ebook that is a complimentary gift for, when you go to wedidit.health, there's 7 best practices for inspiring our loved ones. And so I'll go through those. The first one, is something that we just were talking about, which is considering the other person's readiness for change. So you can really draw on what I just said about the stages of change to kind of think about, are they open at all to learning about a plant-based diet or healthier eating? Or do I definitely get the sense of like this is not a topic they want to go to? If they are somewhat receptive, you're going to have better luck with offering tools and information and resources. Um, so if they aren't at all receptive, sometimes one of the tips that we'll get into is, being a positive role model. That might be your best bet sometimes. And so sort of what you described, of just being positive and not only talking about food, just being a supportive but vibrant and healthy person in their life. You never know when something might shift that then they might reach out for support on how to change their lifestyle. But if we're pressuring them when they're not open, just think about any of us. If someone pressures us, we get defensive. And also, when someone acts like they have all the answers for someone else, it creates this experience sort of shame or not feeling good enough for people. So we tend to push back against that. So if we're doing that to the other person by like, I have all the answers here, if you do this, and we may be right, but if someone's not in a place to receive that, it can come off as pushy and make them push back. So first, just being aware of where they're at in their own change process. And if they're more open, then you might think about some of the other steps here. Step 2, which is tailoring your message to their deepest concerns. So if they have some receptivity and you want to talk to them about eating plant-based, really think about like, well, where are their interests and concerns rather than like, I'm doing it. You can share your story about why you're doing it and how it's helped you, and that's beneficial. But then you want to be aware of like what interests them. If they have health issues, maybe you're going to share specific articles that relate to their health concern. If they're a person that is really into the environment, you might share, a documentary or a resource that relates to that. So just kind of being aware of like what really might speak to them. Um, and then the third one is being aware of the barriers to change, and how you might support them. If they are somewhat receptive, but they're still not maybe making that change, you might look at like, how can I support them? And again, this isn't rushing in to do too much if they're not open to it. But if they are saying, like, I don't know what I'd eat, you could say something along the lines, could I be a thought partner with you to kind of sort out some options? Would you be open to that? And by asking permission first, you're not putting a whole lot of energy doing and doing for someone when they may not be in a place to really draw on it. But if they're open, then you can see, like, maybe we go to a cooking class together. Maybe I do a recipe and try something out together that replicates something that they like, that but a healthier version of it. So really seeing how can you support them with their barriers to change. Um, the fourth one I have, the fourth practice is show, don't just tell. And this one is probably the one that we're going to do the most because often it's being the role model. It's how we're living our life and being positive and vibrant and healthy, that is going to inspire people to kind of be more intrigued about, well, what are they doing that's helping them be healthy? When so many people are dealing with health concerns, what's helping them? And, kind of being aware of your own self-care as part of this. If you're not taking care of you, it's going to be harder for you to be an example for others. So really, living this lifestyle in a way that you feel good about, making sure you have supports on your journey. Share delicious food so people get a sense of like, wow, this is really good. This is, that's part of what opened me up to eating plant-based. Is before I saw that program that helped me decide to go plant-based, I had eaten at a retreat center that had vegetarian and plant-based and food, and it was like delicious. So it made me realize, oh, well, this is a possible thing, like I could do this maybe. So, and then I have the remaining practices are sharing compelling documentaries. Often documentaries say things that just can't be captured any other way. There are so many people that a documentary, whether it's What the Health, Forks Over Knives, The Game Changers, Cowspiracy, that have been transformative, that's opened our mind to new information and just kind of touched our heart level as well as our head level of why change could be possible and why it's positive. So often just by, while you can't always push a documentary on someone, sometimes that is the thing that will speak to them. And then supporting the other person with positive messages and encouragement. Sometimes we tend to be critical. We tend to tell people what they're doing wrong or why what they're doing is going to hurt them. And sometimes that's helpful to share, but often people do respond better to encouragement. So again, if they are open to change and they're starting to eat healthier, even if it's not perfect, supporting and encouraging anything that's in the direction of greater health. And really being aware of how you communicate. One of the things I think about with this encouragement and how to support them in a positive way is, well, one, being an ally, not an adversary. So, what is my intention here? Start with your heart, communicate in a way that is aware of like, what do you want for the conversation and how do you communicate in a way that actually supports that? Like, maybe it's just for us to understand each other better. Maybe it's for us to have at least an open conversation where each of us feels supported. Um, Maybe I need to just ask them to be an ally on my health journey, if they're not yet ready to change, so that at least they're supporting me and not undermining my journey. And that often will help them learn more about it in a positive way without being pressured. And then the last one I would add is being patient and keeping the faith. And that's the seventh practice. And it's just remembering that change is a journey, that most of us had many seeds planted over time before we made our change. We may have had setbacks. And just knowing that for other people, you just never know what your encouragement might do. And it might not lead to their change immediately, but maybe it's something that kind of plants a seed and then other seeds are planted. And then they may come back to you and surprise you that, they're wanting to eat healthier or try new things. So, and I would just add on that one, stay connected to your own reasons for this. Stay connected to your own vision for like a healthier world where more people are not suffering from disease, where we're eating in ways that nourish our mind, body, and spirit. And which would lead to more positivity in general.
Those are wonderful practices to keep in mind, especially the continuing to offer support, being a positive role model, respect other people's journey. I think it's one thing that I think is very key. We have to kind of step back, be patient, remember that it's their lives. The people, they have a choice to make on their own. I admire people who are married to individuals who have not made the change because that is absolutely difficult, having to cook for two people, two different meals.
Yes, yes.
And I had a guest on once who she came on twice, and the second time her husband had already made the change. But I want to say that it took about, I don't remember if it was 7 or 9 years.
Wow.
Yes, and she kept such a beautiful perspective on it. The second time she came on, it was all about he's on board. And you never know, you just never know. But the pandemic going through this time is what really helped because I think it raised awareness for a lot of people of the consequences when we don't take care of ourselves, that we become more vulnerable to viruses and infections and illnesses.
Yeah, yeah, like that great study in the British Journal of Medicine about eating a plant-based diet was associated with 73% lower risk of moderate to severe COVID outcomes. That's huge, 73% lower risk of that. So you may still get sick, but it may be that the outcome is much better.
Right. In your guide, you talk about some of those concerns can be related to nutrition itself. So sometimes people may wonder, where do you get your protein? Which we hear, that's a common question. I wonder if you could just lightly touch on these two things that also contribute to the concerns that people have. One of them we hear a lot of, which is the cost of going plant based. And then the other one that could also kind of persuade people away from this way of living is when a physician discourages it because the physician is not necessarily informed. Would you like to say anything about those two?
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, in the ebook, there is a section about, communicating about these common concerns. And before getting into the specifics of the things you just mentioned, I will say one thing I mentioned in the ebook is when people bring these things up and you're responding, first just being aware that if they're just trying to have an argument, and not really open to feedback, just being aware of that and not feeling like you have to exhaust yourself trying to give information and sharing more in terms of like I messages and validating their concerns is helpful. Like I know when I first became plant-based, like I think I would get impatient with people sometimes like now I got it, why don't you get it, And I think I've learned over time that, well, I didn't get it right away about some of these issues. It took me a lot of years and research and just kind of a whole process to really fully understand some of these issues. So I can learn to be patient as other people are on their journey of trying to sort these things out. So with that as a background, as you're thinking about these things, so one you mentioned cost and first of all, it really depends on how we're eating plant-based. If we're eating a lot of like pre-made prepared foods that, those can add up, whether you're buying them plant-based, vegan or not, all those prepared foods can really add up. So just kind of knowing that. But if you're eating basic whole food diet, a lot of that is very affordable. If you're eating things like rice and quinoa and beans and greens and fruits in season as much as possible, frozen fruits even because they're usually frozen at the point of fresh, greatest freshness. All of those things are super nutritious, but not super expensive. So just realizing, it can be affordable. And, there are different websites that have to do with that, like Plant Based on a Budget. I know she specializes in how to help people cook plant-based in a very affordable way. So knowing there's so many resources out there to make it affordable. And yes, there are challenges because there are food deserts and things that can make it hard for people to have access to healthy food. That's for sure too. But in general, if you're eating more whole foods, that can be very affordable. I think the other thing you mentioned was about physicians and physicians that might not promote a plant-based diet or have that background. That's challenging. Sometimes I have clients who have health issues and I want them to be aware of the plant-based option. And I'll just direct them to resources by MDs who are plant-based, whether it be Dr. Neil Barnard's work or Dr. Esselstyn or Dr. Ornish, Dr. Greger. I just try to direct them towards resources where they could maybe find out enough information that makes them intrigued, and then they could share that with their doctor. Sometimes we might even look into like finding a doctor that is more of a lifestyle medicine practitioner if that's available in our area, or even, I know you've had some people that do telemedicine in that area. So just kind of knowing there are resources out there. I do want to add too about the other things you mentioned, like the carbs. I find that always so frustrating when people talk about their carbs. I think that is something that's been kind of promoted by sort of like I would say the meat industry that wants to kind of view carbs as all negative. And like carbohydrates are a macronutrient, just like protein and fat are, and we need all three of them, but there are healthier versions of each one, and so just realizing, okay, if I'm eating a lot of really processed carbohydrates, like processed flours and sugars and things like that, yeah, that's probably not really healthy. But if I'm eating an apple, I'm eating celery, salads, beans, greens, all of these things do have carbohydrates in them, but they're really, really healthy and nourishing. They're attached to fiber and micronutrients. And, you know, so just kind of being aware of that.
Also, I want to mention that as we're wrapping up here, is that you are also working on some research. And again, it depends on when this episode comes out, whether people can participate. But would you like to tell us about the research that you're doing associated with a plant powered vegan lifestyle and the mind, body, spirit wellness?
Sure. One thing that really intrigues me as a psychologist is how what we eat affects our mental health, our emotional well-being, and even our spiritual well-being. So the research that I'm doing is I have a survey that asks about, it's for people who are eating a vegan plant exclusive diet. Um, and it can be for any reason, whether they chose it for ethical reasons, health reasons, environmental reasons. And the survey asks about the benefits or life changes they've had as a result of eating this way. And then also some of the challenges they might face, whether it be socially, dealing with social situations where you're the only one eating that way. And also emotionally, sometimes, as we learn the different things about the health and other benefits of eating plant-based, we can feel different emotions that we're frustrated we didn't know these things sooner. And maybe we or others suffered unnecessarily. So I ask about their emotional challenges with changing their lifestyle too and how they dealt with that. And then I'm doing some follow-up interviews with a select group of the people that have done the survey. And my goal with this is in the book to convey, the changes in mind, body, spirit that people experience as they're eating in ways that nourish their body and are aligned with like deeper values that they hold. And there's both the nutritional benefit of eating in ways that give our body all the nutrients it needs. And then there's kind of psychological benefits of living aligned with our deepest values. And, whether that be caring deeply for our own health, whether that be choosing to live as lightly on the earth as we're able to, all those things, there's amazing shifts that people are reporting. And I think a lot of people in my survey and research so far have reported like they feel more of an interconnectedness with all of nature, that just like as they eat in this healthy way, they feel more connected to all life. And I think there's a growing move towards just greater compassion for all as well, for people that eat this way, like animals, other humans, their own self. So I'm excited to see what comes from it. The survey will probably be open for, till mid-March. So that may not be open anymore at that point, but I'm definitely open to people reaching out to me if they're interested about the research, because I'll still be collecting some data for a while before I fully get into the writing. So
Well, that's wonderful. Well, so for our listeners who might be interested in either participating in the survey, again, depends on when we come out, this episode comes out, or obtaining your guide, 7 Best Practices for Inspiring Change, what is the best way to contact you?
sure. So, in terms of just contacting me about my research and just, I write a blog about thriving emotionally, socially, and spiritually with the plant-powered vegan lifestyle. So for any of that, my website, which is www.angelacrawfordphd, one word, .com. So that's how you can contact me. And then for the ebook, that's part of the We Did It health. So www.wedidit, one word, .health. And that's where you can have access to the ebook. And also, we do have ongoing presentations and Facebook Live shows and things like that that elaborate on some of the concepts and bring on other guests and that are, kind of working through these things with other people, like different lifestyle coaches and other professionals that can lend their expertise as well. So we invite you to join in this community because it is a plant-based community and supporting people towards greater health and well-being.
We definitely want you to chime in. Let us know if you've adopted a plant based lifestyle and how that has impacted your health. It's been great chatting with you today, Angela. I really appreciate what you're doing and that you're able to share this information with my listeners. So, thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me. I've loved being here. Thank you.
Thanks. You've been listening to the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast with your host, Maya Acosta. If you've enjoyed this podcast, do us a favor and share with one friend who can benefit from this episode. Feel free to leave us an honest review on Apple Podcasts. That helps us to spread our message. You can also head on over to podinbox.com/HLS to leave me a voicemail. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, thank you for listening.